Well, welcome everyone to Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game. I'm your host, Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and money color commentator. On today's show, Sole and Separate Property, part 5 of our series on estate planning with estate planning attorney Elizabeth Westby. Welcome to our 5th segment, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Steve.
Wow, that last segment was horrible. I mean, like all the terrible stories.
Yeah.
If we don't do things right, it can be really bad. Right. I'm starting to think that sole and separate property really matters in your mind.
It does, or it can, and I think it should for most people, for a couple of reasons. Of course, now we are getting married at an older age, which we talked about, I think, in our first segment. But not just that, but divorce is, of course, has been prevalent for years and years, but now I'm seeing people divorce well into their 60s even. I have a client right now, they've been married 49 years, and she's getting a divorce. She wants out. So because the divorce age, I think the average is about 50 years old now for the average divorcee, you really need to plan. And people who are in my generation really need to keep an eye on this as well. And if you're out of a marriage, between marriages, another important item for you is sole and separate. And why, you ask? Because Arizona is a community property state. That means, in very simple terms, that anything that is an asset that is gained during the marriage is considered an asset of the community. So it belongs to each individual equally, or equitably, I should say.
But you said a critical word I thought I just heard was from the point that the union began.
That's correct.
Going forward. Doesn't say anything about what happened before.
Right, and that is what sole and separate property is. It is any asset that you have in your name alone before your marriage, or if it's a gift or inheritance during the marriage. So it's very important to have sole and separate.
Okay, so I'm thinking of one of my kids, if they got married, they own property.
Right.
She does. She
Absolutely.
has things that are of value.
Yep.
So you could, if I'm hearing correctly, you could partition this property that's hers, even though we're in a community property state, and that person, if that my in-law becomes an outlaw, he can't get it.
Right. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and I think you're alluding to a few things, and let me just back up and clarify a little bit. If, let's say, no agreements were made beforehand, they just got married, he moved into the house, and they lived there, had kids there, it's going to be very difficult for her to state that that is her sole and separate property, even though, let's say, her name alone is on the home for all those years. He's still going to get an equitable division of anything that had gained, right? Any equity that the home had accumulated during the marriage. So the only way to really, really protect yourself is either to get a prenuptial agreement, which is pretty much a contract that discloses everything between the two parties who are about to be married, says whatever assets they own, whatever debts they own, but most importantly in Arizona, it allows you to contract out of the community property laws. I don't know if you remember in one of the earlier segments when I stated that in a community property state, both spouses need to sign on a deed, right? Well, if you have a prenuptial agreement or an anti-nuptial agreement, which is an agreement that is created after the marriage, it's not as secure, it's not as good, but it's still good enough in most cases. But that allows you to transfer property and hold property in your individual name. You could effectively be married and have a trust in your sole and separate name. Transfer all of your sole and separate property into that trust. That's the primo right there. That's how you keep it all under your name, and then it doesn't matter. Then let love be love. Let yourself enjoy your partner and build that relationship without feeling like, wow, I must be with this person because of my property that I stand to lose.
Okay, so I'm hearing because of our cultural changes, because of divorce seems to be in multiple marriages throughout your life, you need to really walk this through. I think I'm thinking of my, like I said, one of my daughters, I'd want to defend her right because of what she's accumulated and what she's done by herself. I'd want to make sure that no matter what happens, that's hers.
Look, and we're talking about this very plainly, but this is not easy. No one gets married thinking, well, I'm going to get rid of them in 5 to 10 years. No, we don't do that. And that's why the planning portion is so important, because once your heart becomes involved, I don't care how smart you are, Steve. I don't care how much schooling you have, how much you think you're prepared. You fall in love and you stop thinking and you start trying to...
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Yeah, and you
just stop thinking.
Yes, and you try and do things that's going to make the partnership easier. So let's say you've got your daughter is a perfect example. She's got her home and she gets married and she's like, let me add you to the deed. Ouch. Right. That's what we call transmutation of soul and separate property into community property. That's very dangerous. That is exactly how you lose, even if you've set yourself up for soul and separate, that's how you lose the soul and separate. You see that a lot in bank accounts. People will add names to bank accounts, or they'll put their inheritance that they received from grandma right into that joint account. It is no longer going to be considered community property, or I'm sorry, soul and separate. It will be community property. Of course, you get to hire a divorce attorney if you ever to get divorced, and you can fight over those terms and spend a good 30 to 50 grand on that one asset. Right, fighting over, is that mine? Is that my soul and separate, or wasn't it? And that's where it's really messy.
So I'm thinking young professionals, millennials, this is a huge issue for them, I would think. Yep. I would be sitting there and doing it now. Why? Because you said when love comes, you stop thinking. I agree with that. I totally agree with that. So I think you need to knock this out now.
Right.
I think you need to really make some demarcation lines and partition your assets.
Yeah.
Why? Even on the before you make that first date, get it all done.
Well, yeah. I think that it's also getting a little bit easier because people are being more educated. I think that the old idea is that a prenuptial agreement means you don't trust me. And that's absolutely false. A prenuptial agreement means I want you to know exactly what you're signing up for, whether that means my debts or my assets. And most of us have more debts than assets, right? When we come into a marriage. And I also want to be able to protect each other from any future harm. And we know exactly what to expect. So I think it actually builds trust in a relationship, being able to discuss those things very open and honestly. So it's not about not trusting them. It's about wanting to include them in what you have.
Let me tell you something. Just from a guy's point of view and a father, I would be of the disposition that if you really loved her, you won't bring any of these assets up. It's hers and hers alone.
Absolutely.
This should not enter into the equation. Just a little side marital counseling from Steve Savant.
Right, and I'm willing to bet that anyone watching this show is like-minded and would be willing to do that. There are folks who wouldn't want to do it and wouldn't want to talk about it, and they don't. But those are the folks who spend a lot of money trying to repair any damage after it's been done.
Hey, as you know, life happens. We need to prep ourselves even at the millennial generation. I mean, of all people, maybe even the more so. We've already made our mistakes in my generation. We don't want you to inherit our thinking. No doubt about it.
And most importantly, the baby boomer generation, because if you are going in, you are between marriages, right? Let's say your first marriage after 30 years has ended. You've definitely probably took a hit in that divorce. You have property, you've got a business, you've got things going on for you. You must be motivated at that point to protect those assets.
I was interviewed some years ago on a show, and they said, Steve, what's the #1 devaluation of a person's money over their lifetime? And I thought, what a great question. And I said, I'd have to say divorce. Divorce, it makes more people impoverished than any other act of the stock market, housing meltdown. You look at the numbers and the actual fit, especially for middle class and below, it is a killer. Yeah. So really, I'm all over you writing these docs right now, get it all up and done. Well, you still got some money, and get this done and call it a day. And if anybody's questioning your affection or love, I say, hey, time to find a new person.
Yep. And again, it's not like you're signing just a form. Like, I need a prenuptial agreement, so you're just signing some form. It's not like you don't have control or a choice. You're the one creating this. So there are choices to be made, and that is something that, again, you get to decide with your partner, and it can be really beneficial.
Okay, I'm into especially you just said we're in a community property state, so I'm into declaring soul and separate property. Right. I want to do everything you say to do on this to make sure it stays that way. And if they want to participate, like you said, the only thing I thought about was when you said, now from this day forward, you made it soul and separate property, but it's a house. Let's say it's a house, because that's what I think of. And from that point on to this point of maybe they dissolve their relationship, but there was a upswing in the market. There was a real estate. Would they actually, if it was still soul and separate, would they participate in that?
Well, no. So if it was soul and separate, again, I want to use your daughter as an example. So she owns this home. She's been in it 5 years. She gets married. They live in it 10 years and then divorce. if they had a prenuptial agreement and she was able to opt out of the community property laws, that would be her sole and separate property. Period. As long as she didn't put it into a family trust with his name on it, as long as she didn't put him on the deed. And it's fine if he paid towards the mortgage, because you could argue out of that. But as long as it was clearly her sole and separate property from the start, no worries. And she gets to have all the benefits of the equity in the home. Now, she gets all the burdens, though, too, if it's on a downswing and there's nothing left in the home. She's upside down. So,
yeah, I think I'll run that risk.
Right. Right.
Well, I want to thank Elizabeth for sharing this series on estate planning. And keep in mind, before moving forward with any of the ideas, especially prenup, I'm all over that. And make sure you talk to your attorney, your tax consultant, and your financial advisor if there's actual economic issues. You've been listening to Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game.